Hello everybody, this is Past Perspectives. Welcome back to a brand new video. And in this video, we're going to be predicting the 2024 presidential election. So I've already categorized certain states as safe for the Democrats and Republicans. You're not going to see a Republican winning a state like New Jersey, or you're not going to see Kamala Harris win a state like Kansas, despite some Democrats and Republicans hoping that these states would be more competitive. More likely than not, these states are certainly going to Trump and Harris. So let's get into the likely states, which are states that I believe have a 70 to 90% chance of going to one political party. For example, I do believe that Kamala Harris has a roughly about an 80% chance of winning New Mexico. I think she also has like a 75% chance of winning Minnesota. Likely, she probably has like a 70% shot of winning Nebraska second. She has like a 72% chance of winning Virginia. And New Hampshire, she has like a 75% chance. Maine at large, she has an 80% chance of winning. So despite some Republicans hoping that they can make these states potentially more competitive, more likely than not, Kamala Harris is going to win these states. Then as for Republicans, Texas is more likely than not going to Trump. I'd say he has like a 75% chance of winning Texas. Despite some Democrats being happy about the polling in Florida, which is surprisingly close, keep in mind, Florida polls have notoriously overestimated Democrats cycle after cycle. 2022, 2018, 2020, 2016. The fact that Florida polls have Trump winning by 5 points, he's probably up by more than that. So, anyways, Florida is likely going to go to Trump. Same with Ohio as well as Iowa, as well as Maine's 2nd Congressional District. So now we're going to get into the really competitive states, which are Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So let's see how these 7 states are going to go. Let's start with the state of North Carolina. This is the only state that Trump won in 2020 of these 7 swing states, and the Harris campaign is actually feeling confident in themselves in North Carolina. But, however, in the 2024 polls right now, Trump currently has a lead by 0.6%, which is within the margin of error, which is making the Harris campaign pretty hopeful about their shots in the state. However, keep in mind, in 2022, which is a cycle where the final polling in North Carolina did overestimate Republican Ted Budd by 3 points, the polls at this point in history, which is around October 1st, according to this, because the polling there ends at October 1st. So in October 1st at this time, Ted Budd was winning by 1.6%, and he ultimately won by 3.2. So the polls in North Carolina underestimated Ted Budd by 1.6% at this stage in history. And then if you also look at the 2020 polls in North Carolina, Biden was up by 1.4% then. Trump ultimately won by 1.3%. So that's a 2.7% overestimation towards the Democratic Party. So looking at that as well as Ted Budd's underestimation in 2022, if you roughly average those out, North Carolina is likely underestimating Trump by about 2 points at this time in history. So I think Trump wins North Carolina by a lean margin. I think he wins it by about 2.5 percentage points. Despite the clamor about Mark Robinson and his scandal there, and I do believe Robinson does lose, keep in mind also that reverse coattails don't exist, and you're going to have a presidential candidate propping up a governor candidate, not the other way around. So I think North Carolina does go red, and if reverse coattails did exist, Biden would have won the state in 2020 when Cooper won the state by about 4 points. So North Carolina most likely is going to go to Donald Trump. I'd say he has about a 65% chance of carrying the state. Now let's go to the state of Nevada. In Nevada, at this point, Kamala Harris is winning by 1.1 percentage points. Trump was winning by as much as 5 when he was going up against Joe Biden, and he was actually winning by quite a bit early in the stage. However, as September hit, it appears that Kamala Harris has taken a lead in polls in Nevada. And although at this point in history, polls in Nevada were overestimating Joe Biden, in every other cycle besides 2020, polls in Nevada have overestimated Republicans. 2016, 2018, 2022, where at this point, Adam Laxalt was winning in the polls there by about 2.2 percentage points. And in reality, he lost by 0.9. So I do believe that polls in Nevada are currently overestimating Maybe they're probably overestimating Trump, if anything. So I think that Harris probably wins Nevada by about 2 percentage points when it's all said and done. So I think Democrats have as good of a shot of winning Nevada as Republicans do of winning North Carolina. Now let's get going to the state of Wisconsin. So Wisconsin as a whole right now, Harris is winning by less than a percentage point. And in 2022, at this point, Ron Johnson was winning in the polls there by about 2.3 percentage points. So polls in Wisconsin at this point in 2022, they overestimated Johnson by about 1 percentage point. But keep in mind also that in 2020 and 2016, Harris and Biden were winning by about 5.5 percentage points. And the final results were Biden ultimately lost Wisconsin he won Wisconsin by a hair in 2020, and Clinton lost it by a hair in 2016. So polls in Wisconsin tend to overestimate Democrats in presidential elections by about 5 to 6 percentage points. And even though in the midterms they were more accurate and they actually slightly overestimated Republicans, keep in mind in 2018 it was the exact same pattern where Democrats were doing well in the earlier polls, and as election hit up, the polls were more competitive and they ultimately ended up being pretty accurate. So considering how Wisconsin polls in midterms tend to be accurate and in presidential elections they tend to overestimate the Democratic Party, I think that following this historical pattern, I think that Donald Trump is going to win the state of Wisconsin by a hair, though, probably by under 1 percentage point. So let's now go to the state of Pennsylvania. This is undoubtedly a key swing state in this election. So Pennsylvania right now, the polls are actually a statistical tie, which is neither Trump nor Harris has a lead in the polls. So they are basically, it is 50-50 between them. And in 2022 in the Senate, despite the final polls having Oz edging out and then being off by about 5 percentage points, the polls at this point on October 1st had Fetterman winning by 4.3%. They underestimated him by about 0.6% at this stage. And also in Pennsylvania in 2018, the polls here at this point, they also, I believe, were slightly overestimating Bob Casey against Lou Barletta, which was in line with the 2020 polls in Pennsylvania, where Biden was up by 6.5 at this point, and he ultimately won it by a much narrower 1.2%. And same thing in 2016, where the Pennsylvania polls were vastly overestimating Hillary Clinton. I think they were off by about 8 percentage points there. But considering how I think the polls in 2022 in Pennsylvania kind of corrected themselves, I think they'll be a lot more accurate this time than they were back in 2020 and 2016. I don't think Trump wins Pennsylvania by 6.5% or about 8 percentage points. But keep in mind, at the same time, you also have to look at the demographics of Pennsylvania. It's a very white working class state, which is Trump's base. Also keep in mind the fact that when Joe Biden won the state in 2020, he won it as Scranton Joe, not as Bay Area Harris, who is now running in Pennsylvania. So I think because of that, I think Trump wins Pennsylvania narrowly, because I think also the assassination attempt on him in Butler, Pennsylvania, I think he's going to get the necessary rural turnout numbers in western Pennsylvania that he needs to win the election there. So with that, Trump is at 264. And then we go to the state of Michigan. So Michigan, Trump barely won it in 2016. And then in 2020, Biden won it by about 2 percentage points, which was a pretty solid margin. I think almost 3 points actually. And unlike Biden, Harris doesn't really have that many weaknesses with the Arab community. So I think this one is more so based off of my instinct, but I think Democrats are going to win Michigan by about 1 to 2 percentage points when it's all said and done. So let's now go to the two Sunbelt states of Arizona and Georgia. Right now in the polls, Trump is winning by 1.5% against Harris in Georgia. And on this time at history, Biden was up by 0.3%, which was his actual margin of victory in Georgia, or maybe it was slightly narrower than that. And keep in mind, in 2022 in the polls, at this point, Raphael Warnock was winning by 1.3 percentage points, and he ultimately won by just 0.9% in the first round. So that's a margin of error of 0.4% in favor of the Republicans. Then if you look at 2020, where Biden won by 0.3, this was basically spot on. So I think this number right here of Trump being up by 1.5% is pretty accurate. Maybe he wins by a little bit more than that, but I think Georgia does go to Trump by about 1 to 2 percentage points. I'd categorize it as a lean Republican state. And now let's go to the state of Arizona. Republicans are actually very confident on Arizona. Of all the swing states, this is the one where they're most confident about. Trump is winning in the polls here by about 1.4 percentage points. And at this time, Biden was winning it by 3.4%, and he ultimately won it by 0.3. So this is very good for Donald Trump. However, if you look at the 2020 polls in Arizona, at this point on October 1st, Mark Kelly won it by 4 percentage points. And they ultimately underestimated him by 0.9%. And you may be thinking, oh, well, that's a midterm year. Midterm years are different from presidential years, which would make sense considering how Trump also got underestimated in 2016 in Arizona. But then, if you look at the 2018 polls here, the 2018 polls in Arizona were very similar to the 2020 polls, where at this point in early October, Kyrsten Sinema was winning by 4.7%, and they ultimately overestimated her by 2.4%, which is the exact same amount that they overestimated Joe Biden by in 2020. So if you see where I'm saying here, it looks like the polls in 2018 and 2020 were pretty close together, meaning there wasn't really that much of a difference between the midterm year and the presidential year then. And in 2022, Kelly was underestimated by 0.9%. So if you think about it then, using that same math here, Trump would be up in Arizona by about 0.5% if you adjust it based off of the 2022 polling error. Now, that being said, I do think Trump wins it by slightly more than 0.5%, but I'd still say Arizona's a lot closer than Republicans think it's going to be. I think Trump wins it by about like 0.8% when it's all said and done. So this is my 2024 election prediction. I think Trump wins 291 electoral votes, while Kamala Harris wins 247. So make sure you guys like this video down below and subscribe to the channel. And Past Perspectives out.